Hello, and thank you for joining us. My name is Ashley Smith, and I'm part of Nobody Left Behind, a suicide prevention coalition whose goal is to eliminate veteran suicide through camaraderie, collaboration, and education. We are here today to discuss the unique experiences of veterans, service members, and their families, and how military service can impact mental health and wellness. Joining us today is Matthew Murray and Roderick Castle. Roderick is a Marine Corps veteran and New York State and nationally licensed creative arts therapist. He has been working with the vulnerable populations for over 20 years and is currently the crisis intervention specialist at the Veterans Outreach Center. Matthew served in the U.S. Army from January of 2006 to February of 2010 as a sergeant with the 1st Cavalry Division. He served 2 combat deployments to Iraq, the first being 15 months and the second 12 months. Currently, he is a Veteran Services Officer with the Monroe County Veterans Service Agency, where since October of 2015, he has assisted and guided veterans in obtaining benefits and services through both the VA and the community. If you or a veteran you know is in crisis and could use extra support, please contact the Veterans Crisis Line. They offer 24/7 confidential crisis support for veterans and their loved ones. They can be reached at 1-800-273-8255 and then press option 1. And crisis doesn't necessarily mean suicidal thoughts, although they of course can help with that too. Crisis can be difficulty sleeping, increased agitation, or just not feeling yourself. Many thanks to our friends at Visible Man for hosting this important conversation.
Hi, my name is Bob, and I am an administrator of sorts with the Visible Man organization. As an organization, we are here to support men's mental health, and work to eliminate male suicide. Having this discussion is a step for us in reaching out, learning what some of the needs are in the local veteran community so that we can see where there exists opportunity for us to help and be an additional resource and support. With that said, I will start with asking some questions for our guests. So, Roderick, my first question is pretty broad, but it's like, what are you seeing and hearing from other veterans about mental health, their requests, their needs?
At the Veterans Outreach Center, we're seeing a lot of veterans just emerging from a COVID kind of isolation. Literally guys that haven't maybe left their apartment, 8-10 times in the last 2 years. The VOC has been, and I know people from the VA and other organizations, the county have all gone to these veterans at different times and seen them, check their welfare, but stepping out that door for them is huge. And coming back to agencies, going back to the VA, getting their health care going again. They need a lot of encouragement and they need a lot of safety. So that's what we try to do, just create that, hey, good to see you again, not make it a big deal, just welcome them back.
Okay, and did you see that COVID had increased issues for them?
Yeah, guys and gals that normally maybe isolated a little bit normally in normal circumstances really just went right into that. And then just were kind of stewing in their own mental health for months and months at a time. So trying to help them emerge from that darkness. That's been the focus of my work for at least the last 6 months.
Okay. Did you have anything that you wanted to add to that, Matt?
Yeah, we saw a major change during COVID, and I'm familiar with Roderick. Actually, we've worked together with a couple veterans. During COVID, our agency actually shut down. We were working from home. We converted our agency, which we usually provide benefits and benefits assistance, to actually a food pantry. We were taking donations. Our back conference room was filled to the ceiling with all kinds of food, and we were actually delivering food to veterans who, had health issues, couldn't get out of the house, couldn't get to the store, and we were doing that for about 6 months. which was it was a change of pace. I mean, it wasn't something we were used to, but there was a lot of veterans that were stuck. I mean, everybody is well aware of what went on. I mean, you had people not getting cancer treatments, and as far as veterans, especially the population that I work with, disabled veterans, they were in a very bad situation for a while.
Okay. And with some of the questions, I'll just toss the question out there, and whoever wants to respond first can go, and the other person can follow up. So one of the things in looking at barriers and stigma with the people you work with and what you do, what would be helpful to those people?
Yeah, I number one on stigma, I do think it's getting better. It's very small increments, but I can honestly say I see more veterans using, mental health terminology, being more willing to admit they have a diagnosis or they have a suspicion that they have something. Just the language is out there more, which is good. I've worked a lot in the city, in urban environments. I see a lot more Black and brown people talking about mental health issues, which is great. That's been another stigmatized population that culturally won't openly talk about that. So, and then you add veteran status on top of that. So it's like double. So it is getting better, but I think the biggest change that I see that works is some people like us being veterans and getting into the human services field and using the language and making it safe for them to tell their stories, because we hear some stories.
Oh yeah.
And it makes you angry sometimes at the military, because how could that happen to this guy? But we hold space for them and we show them that other veterans speak this language and we can help you. So that's huge modeling. Yeah.
And I think that's key. And that's not to say that if you're not a veteran, you couldn't relate or offer services, but having been there, at least myself, I've found that veterans open up to me. I know Roderick over at the Veterans Outreach Center, his agency and our agency work very close together because they have the Richards House over there, which is the homeless shelter. Alec runs it. There's a number of veterans over there. They're my clients, and a lot of them suffer from mental health issues. I'm open with the veterans that I meet with, especially when I have veterans that come in my office, and I meet with a lot of veterans that I know are struggling. I can see they're struggling. Just to break the ice and try to make them feel okay, I'll explain to them what I've been through. I'll tell them what I've been through, where I was at. And that's something that Roderick just alluded to too, about the stigma. It has gotten a lot better. Because when I got out 12 years ago, 2010, even myself, for the first year or two, looking back now, I was self-destructing, but I would say I'm fine, and it's always going to stem from the Army mentality or the military mentality from day one in boot camp or basic training. Suck it up,
get through,
don't complain, And nowadays it is much more accepted. I do still get veterans, especially veterans who are in the field of law enforcement, and in other jobs that may require a security clearance and stuff like that, that are very concerned and actually will not file a claim for PTSD, even though they have it, or seek treatment. Veterans who are still in the Guard or Reserves because out of fear that it'll ruin their career. One of the questions I get a lot too, or one of the concerns I hear is they're going to take my weapon, they're going to take my guns, or I won't be able to get a pistol permit. That's one of the things that I hear a lot from veterans too, which isn't necessarily the case. And I explain that to them too. And I think one of the good things about our agency as well as yours is there's a lot of veterans that work there and they're open about their experiences. I know Alec really well, and
Yeah.
And Laura was the CEO.
Mm-hmm.
We're all open, especially at our agency. My director, Nick Stefanovic, his story
His
is really
story's out
well
there.
known.
Yeah.
And his story is actually pretty incredible. His experience when he got out of the military, and he's done interviews before, so this isn't a secret. But he spiraled downhill. At one point, had a very bad addiction. He was homeless, living underneath Driving Park Bridge for a couple months, and he went from that all the way to where he is now. The director of our agency, and that goes to show. And I real quick, I do think that is one of the I don't want to say biggest motivators, but one of the things that can probably be very helpful that may be overlooked is somebody being open that has had that experience and has succeeded and moved past that, and having them explain that to them, and just be open with them and say, hey, look, I was there, this is what I went through. And once they understand it, see that, maybe they don't feel so bad about themselves, and they see maybe a little bit of hope, like, wow, this guy was where I was, and look at him now.
Yeah, and I wanted to explain a little bit of the process. Sometimes we'll get a vet new to the community, maybe homeless, just got off the bus, or for whatever reason, it's a living situation. It's caused him to become homeless, and then meeting with the Veterans Outreach Center might be the first step, and our behavioral health department will, if we pick up on some kind of mental health challenge, or they state that, we'll meet with them, do a quick assessment, and hear a story about something that happened in the military, maybe created a traumatic brain injury, a suspicion of it, and we can see direct symptoms. So have you ever filed a claim? No, I don't think I have one. You should try. This happened to you in the military. There may be a connection. Let's get you over to the VSA and get those guys talking to you, because they'll have your back. They'll do everything they can to see if you qualify for a disability, which can change their life.
Especially for a homeless
it's income.
person.
Yeah. It's regular income on a monthly basis. So we get them from there to there, and then the next step would be the VA. Getting that claim in, getting some doctor's visits in, getting the evidence going.
Vet center too.
Yeah.
The vet center
for counseling.
We work very closely with them, and for those who aren't familiar, the vet center, it can be confusing because technically the vet center is part of the VA. They are VA employees, but it's separate from the VA. So, for example, the medical records and mental health records are not shared with the VA. They're private. In the vet center, that's all they do. They only specialize in PTSD, readjustment counseling, and sometimes, I don't want to say it's a bad thing. They're a small agency, but not every veteran can go there.
Yeah.
It's strictly for combat veterans or veterans who were victims of military sexual trauma and stuff of that nature. And really, I couldn't tell you how many veterans through the years that have been through where the VOC, where Roderick is, over to us, or over to the vet center, or vice versa. And I think our three agencies in Monroe County, we work really well hand in hand. There's a lot of us who know each other. There's some of us who have actually worked at the other agency. So
that's always helpful.
Yeah, and it's one veteran always pops in my mind when you talk about homeless veterans and getting benefits and life changing. I remember a social worker. I think it was a social worker from the VA. I can't remember, but she brought this veteran in. He was in really bad mental health shape at the time, homeless, had no place to go. We filed claims, and I talked to him, and I wound up being able to get him 100% service connected. And he kept in touch with me. I think he just liked to talk to me, but probably about maybe a year or 2 years later, he gave me a call, stopped by. I want to show you my new car. And he stopped in, and I saw him, and he started telling me, I got an apartment, I'm in school, I'm working on my degree, I got a car, I have visitation of my kid again. And
That's
It's
good to hear.
just, if you could have taken a snapshot from 2 years ago to now, it's not even the same person.
I wanted to touch on something you mentioned. So with the PTSD in the military, it sounds like you're not just talking about combat PTSD. You mentioned like sexual assault or something, which we've heard those stories. So what
Yeah.
ranges of PTSD are you seeing with mental health?
I always talk about the worst cases I see, and it's, I don't know. I think they're working on processes like, in MEPS. What's that stand for? MEPS, military something processing station.
Yeah,
It's basically where
it's where you go before you go.
They check you out, mentally, physically, before you even raise your hand and swear. You uphold the Constitution. I think they're working on that process, but in my opinion, it needs to be better in the behavioral health field, because the worst cases I see are guys and gals who had some kind of inherent mental health, either a vulnerability or something ongoing. They made it through MEPS, and then something traumatic happens in the military, and then the combination of the two things creates a really bad situation. Oftentimes they get discharged for substance abuse disorder or some other disciplinary thing. They end up with not an honorable, maybe worst case scenario that it's dishonorable, but usually it's like under honorable or general, which can definitely affect the benefits they can receive down the line. So a lot of the vets I work with are in that category. They had something going on before the military, traumatic childhood. We talk about ACE scores, adverse childhood experiences. A lot of these vets have very high ACE scores. It's a 10-question thing, and anything above 5, is a good indicator of later mental health issues. So things that happen in your childhood, like various abuse, a parent that went to jail or prison, watching adults hit each other or yell at each other, things so they already have a high ACE score. They've got some maybe inherent mental health stuff through the family, and then something in the military, combat, assaulted sexually or otherwise, just boot camp.
Yeah.
For any branch is a traumatic experience on purpose. They're trying to see, are you going to be able to keep your cool in a crazy situation? Some people can't.
You're hitting everything you're saying. You're hitting a nail on the head. But you just brought up a good point that I don't hear brought up often, and it's actually something that I've really never thought about, because everybody focuses on treatment after the military. And I will say, since the time I got out 12 years ago, from what I've seen, they are doing a lot more, but you don't hear much. And truthfully, I haven't really given a lot of thought to the in processing, and it can be a catch-22 as far as pre-existing conditions, which unfortunately, where we come in, if we're filing a claim for disability, if there is a pre-existing condition, something traumatic in their past prior to military, oftentimes that's a reason for denial for PTSD, regardless of what they've been through. I will say, though, I can only attest to what I hear and see. I know when I got out in 2010, there was nothing. There was no counseling. There was no coaching. There was no information. I knew absolutely nothing.
You're on your own.
Yeah. That kind of rolls into another question I have, readjusting after active duty. What's out there that also maybe applies to mental health with helping service members to adjust after from active duty to civilian life? Yeah,
that's where I was just thinking of that. So like I was saying, when I got out, I had problems, and I didn't want to accept it at the time. But once it finally got to the point where I realized, okay, I do need to see somebody, I didn't know where to go. I remember I was out about a year and a half, and somebody said to me, hey, you should file a claim. And I said, a claim? with who? Like, what are you talking about? I had no idea.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Now
Nobody
you
ever
do it
told
for a
me.
living.
And I've always said this, that the military does a very good job of training people how to fight and how to be soldiers and how to kill and everything, but they don't really do a good job of untraining soldiers and people how to readjust back into civilian life. Now, I know, and I'm sure you've heard, and probably at least the last 5 years, I've heard that the military has implemented as part of their out processing benefits.
Yeah, they're starting to listen.
Yeah, and they actually will have the military member actually meet with a representative that will go over and file claims for them before they get out, which is huge. But as far as the mental health aspect, there needs to be more done. But still, while you're in, the stigma is you don't want that label. They could discharge you because of it. And I'm sure you ran into this a lot.
Yeah.
And what Roderick brought up about bad discharges. I've worked with many veterans, some of which had what's called other than honorable, which you could be discharged under honorable conditions. The next lowest is a general under honorable conditions. And then the next one under that is called an OTH, other than honorable conditions. If you have that type of discharge, you're barred from pretty much any benefits. The VA won't accept a claim for disability. You can't get health care. They have started accepting veterans with that type of discharge for mental health care. And discharge upgrades is something I do too. I'm not sure if you've ever done those.
We go over it with them, like what
Okay.
the basics of what they're going to have to do.
Yeah.
And then we get them over to you guys.
And they're very hard,
Yeah.
very hard
Yeah.
to get.
And we let them know it's not an uphill battle here.
Yeah, I've only probably, I've been doing this close to 10 years. I've probably only had maybe about 6 or 7 that I was able to get upgraded. And all of the ones that I did, all were related to mental health issues and PTSD as the reasons for the disciplinary actions and discharges. And actually, all of them I can think of, when we got the upgrade, we were also able to get them disability benefits. But unfortunately, I'm sure you've seen it, a lot of bad stories that, real quick, because I know you want to move on, but I was just talking about this recently. One of the things that I experienced in my time doing this, and one of the things I'm most proud of, one of my veterans was incarcerated for 34 years. His wife first came to me about 6 years ago. They got married while he was in prison. He was a Vietnam veteran, highly, highly decorated. He served as an officer and an NCO, Presidential Unit type citations. I worked with his wife for about 5 years, never met the gentleman correspondence. I was able to get him service connected. And his wife told me about a year and a half ago that he was up for parole again for the 12th time. And he was in prison for double murder. And I just popped into my head. I said, you know what? I could try writing a parole board. I don't know if it'll do any good. So I wrote a letter, and it was about 2 weeks prior, and I didn't even know if it would make it to the parole board, let alone, I doubted it would ever make a difference. But about a month and a half later, I get a letter from him, and he said they granted him parole, and they read the letter at his parole hearing. He said that they were crying and stuff like that. And
Excellent.
yeah, I just thought to myself, wow. And people don't realize that even though when I got out 12 years ago, I could say that there was nothing there, but at least I came home to thank yous and hugs. Vietnam veterans, they came home to horrible treatment. Yeah. Called horrible names, take off your uniform, don't hire them, let alone offer them mental health care. And the gentleman that I'm speaking of, he saw a lot of combat, and he was highly decorated for it, but he obviously had some PTSD issues. Yeah. And he was living in the city. There was some young people selling drugs in front of his house. He asked them to leave. Yeah. And one day he went out there, asked them to leave, an altercation, and he wound up shooting both of them.
He's a killer.
And
he's
34
trained by the
years,
U.S. to kill.
Yeah,
So.
and he spent 34 years of his life in prison, which had he maybe received some mental health treatment, or there had been somebody there that may have been you may have been able to avoid it. And just to finish the story off, he finally came into my office maybe about 8 months ago. I met him for the first time, and not what I was expecting. He was the most soft-spoken, quietest, nicest guy, one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. And that's just one story of how veterans can fall by the wayside. And
That makes me think of another question for you guys. With all of these cases that you deal with whatever it is, PTSD, do you hear stories from people that maybe they're not even realizing is impacting their mental health about their treatment post-service, whether it's trying to get a job, whether it's, whatever it is? Do you hear those stories?
Yeah. A lot of times you hear the stories of guys that went in, 17, 18 years old. So they're in high school, maybe started some college or whatever. So they have a group of this social group, and then they go away, for maybe 2 years, maybe 4, maybe longer. And then they come back and talking about transition, and they've changed, but everything around them, has changed also. But they're some of those high school kids, the ones that their friends, the ones that are doing well, have probably moved on or moved somewhere else. But the ones that aren't doing so well are still there. So sometimes they move because of different things. What maybe happened to them in the military, it's thrown them off. They move back in with the parents. They move same neighborhood, start hanging out with some of whoever's left of their friends, who might not be into some great stuff, coping mechanisms, substances. And there you go. You got the basics of a substance use disorder, along with some trauma. Maybe not PTSD, but something happened. And then you got a bad situation, and then you got to start getting in trouble with the law, maybe not finding employment right away. And then there you go. And then conflict with the parents starts, because now you got an adult living with the parents who's been trained to kill by the military, and boom.
Boy, everything you're saying, you're like hitting the nail on the head.
So here's one that's more personal, though.
Yeah.
For both of you. When did you realize that you needed to make sure your mental health was considered? I know you kind of mentioned something about that.
As far as when I got out of the military?
Yeah.
So my experience was different than most, like Roderick was just touching on. I went into the military, I was 28 years old. So I was older than, some of the sergeants and NCOs that were way above me. But most of these guys and girls, they're kids. I have kids older than that, and they've never lived on their own. They've never paid bills on their own. They haven't done anything that an adult does, and now they're being trained, to go off to war. And even when that's done and they're ready to get out, they still haven't had any of those experiences. So they still don't know how to do it, let alone dealing with all this traumatic stuff. And I know for myself, I struggled a lot, and I was 28 years old, and I know my struggles. And most of my buddies were young, and I know they struggled. But that's part of the reason why, because when you're 18, you can join the Army, you can do a lot of stuff, but your mind, how many 18-year-olds have a lot of life experience,
Yeah.
For me, I think the basics of becoming a mental health counselor started, in the Marine Corps. I was a little older when I was 22, which is almost, older than the average. The average is probably 18, 19. And so by the time I became in my 3rd, 4th year in the Marine Corps, became an E5, a sergeant. I'm running a crew on a ship. I'm 25, 26, and I've got a bunch of 17, 18-year-olds, on my crew. And I'm playing the big brother role. I'm playing, the leader, keeping them alive up on the deck of the ship, because they're not putting their helmet on, or they're walking near a road or something, So I started to find myself placed in that role of, my girlfriend just broke up with me. I don't know what to do. I want to kill myself. I want to jump off the ship. Guys would come to me like that. So I started finding out I could hold space for those guys because I was doing relatively well. I thought compared to them, my things weren't so out there. But so getting out of the Marine Corps and then trying to figure out what I wanted to do, I realized I wanted to try to help others, with their mental health. Because I'd been through a lot as a child, and I felt like I got to a place by the time I got in the Marine Corps, doing pretty well. So I wanted to try to give some of that back. But even for me, thinking I was doing great, the minute I stepped back off the plane to Buffalo from Arizona, getting out of the Marine Corps, just going back to Buffalo, going back to college, it was a huge transition and months of depression.
Did you realize it at the time?
No, I just reacted. I just started doing weird things.
Yeah.
Just not going to class or just suddenly, wow, this is exactly what I wanted to do. This is why I got out of the Marine Corps, finished my degree that I had started years ago. And it was very difficult because of the routine I was used to, having the chow hall available.
Yeah.
Now I'm living in an apartment, and I had lived on my own before, but it was still very difficult, and not having my guys around. As much as they drove me nuts sometimes,
your support,
they're always around
for each other. And kind of going back to what you said about time kind of stops, it really does, for everybody else, life has gone on, but for you, you go away on a 15-month deployment.
Been all over the world.
The last time you left, that's what you remember. And with the school, I struggled, and because I was older, I felt like I owed it to my best friend got killed over there. We lost a lot of guys. I felt like I need to do something with my life. So I forced myself through college, and school was not my thing, but I was afraid. I remember being very afraid because when I had graduated, internet was just coming out. And I was, but college was easier than I thought. But going back to your first question, I remember, I can remember the exact moment and event where it hit me that I'm not okay, and I need to get help. Where, I had first realized it. And it was probably about a year and a half, almost 2 years after I got home. I always explain it as I was self-destructing. I was out partying, drinking. I felt indestructible. I used to think to people and say, what are you going to do to me that hasn't already been done to me? You're going to blow me up? I didn't care how many people there were, but my anger was the biggest thing. And everybody around me was walking on eggshells. My mother, my wife, everybody. And I kind of knew it, but I just didn't think anything was wrong with me. And one day, my youngest daughter, she must have been about 8 at the time, I came home from work and I asked her, I said, do you have homework or any homework to do? And she said, no. And I said, okay. And then my wife came home a couple hours later, and I heard her go ask my wife, can you help me with my homework? And I said, why'd you lie to me? I said, I just asked you a couple hours ago and you said you didn't have any homework. She goes, she said, I was afraid to ask you for help. And it was like that moment, it just hit me like, wow, my kid is afraid to ask me for help with her homework. And I'm like, there's something wrong there, and that was it for me.
So, and this kind of follows on with that as well. What was the hardest thing for you about finding the support you needed in your journey?
You want to go? Or?
Yeah. I think admitting, because every time, people hear, well, you're a Marine, anything in the military, people are impressed by people that haven't lived that life. So again, admitting at first, but I think what motivated me the most was once I decided I was going to be in a counseling role or in a role where I just hold space for people telling their difficult stories. You can't do that work without being okay with yourself, because you will soak that up very quickly if you're not doing well. So that's when I decided if I'm going to do this job, I've also got to go to counseling. And in master's level, mental health counseling at Nazareth College anyway, it was strongly suggested. They can't mandate it, but it's strongly suggested we go through a counseling program at the school while we're becoming counselors ourselves. Just get your stuff together so you can help others.
Did you kind of find it therapeutic for you?
Yeah.
Meeting with veterans, helping veterans, and talking.
Yeah, as long as I'm in a good place. But there were some times early in my career where I wasn't there yet.
Yeah.
And I was taking it home. Like I felt like I was in that guy's shoes because I got it. I was so empathetic. It was not healthy. So learning, create barriers for yourself, creating balance for yourself.
Which kind of feeds into another question I have down here, which is like, as you opened up about your mental health struggles as a vet, what responses did you get from people, whether they were in the military or out of the military?
Yeah, and that's kind of going back to what he was just talking about. The key for me, and I was very, very frustrated, and it was finding somebody who actually, I would say, I don't want to say that people don't care, but finding somebody who at least seemed like they cared. When I finally did try to seek help, I met with probably 4 or 5 different counselors, a therapist over a couple of years, and none of them. I mean, it got to the point where I could walk in, talk to them for 1 minute, and I could tell this is a waste of time. Here's a seashell, rub it, and you got a degree on the wall, download this app. But I said I'll give it one more try, and I went to the VA, and I met with this doctor. I won't say his name, but I had a bit, I didn't think, and I was planning on never coming back. I was going just to say I did, but I walked out of there with a totally different outlook. I actually look forward to going back and seeing him again. And I've kept in touch with him over the years, and I have this conversation all the time now. I was just talking about this today with one of my veterans, that what was different about him as opposed to all the other ones. And looking back now, he listened. He listened. He wasn't a veteran, but I would go in there and he just listened to me. And after a while, I would tell him a story, he would tell me a story, and he just related, and I felt like he cared. And I tell that to veterans now that are going through that, and people are always telling me, you need to slow down, you need to watch your mental health, you're working too much, you're doing too much. And I told myself, and I never expected myself to be in this role, but I mean, I guess it was fate, but my struggles, and I struggled to find help, and I felt like no one would help me. And I was struggling, living paycheck to paycheck. And when I started this job, I told my wife and everybody, I said, I will never do that to a veteran, what was done to me, because I know how it feels. Yeah. And if I got to work 24 hours a day, I can't do that to a veteran, because I've been there,
Yeah. Now, we're getting short on time, so I did want to touch on something, because I know it's a big topic for you guys: suicide. Have you dealt with people that were suicidal, that either reached out to you personally or that were referred to you because, maybe their spouse calls and said, hey?
Yeah, and unfortunately, at the VOC, it's different levels of crisis and suicide ideation or plan. I'll explain those terms, but every week at least one, sometimes 3 or 4, because the veterans feel safe coming to us. It may be a veteran we haven't seen in 3 or 4 months, but they show up, they're at the door at 8:30. Oh, we haven't seen you in a while. How you doing? Come on back. Let's talk. And then they sit, and I don't feel like I want to be here anymore. That they start the conversation that way, and we open up the dialogue. Oh, so you're feeling like you want to kill yourself. we say the words directly,
Mhm.
You feel like you want to kill yourself.
Mhm.
You have a plan to do that. And that's one of the recommendations is you ask directly. Don't worry about using the word suicide. It's okay to use. You need to use it so they know what you're talking about. So yes, and then depending on, we've got 2 good counselors that we can assess. We decide, is this just feelings, ideation, that but you don't have a plan to do it. You're just having the feelings, and we make a plan with you to let us know if you start planning. We try to open up that door. And then if they need to go to the hospital, we get them to the hospital. If they need to just get in touch with their VA counselor, we help them make an appointment to give them some future orientation, some hope. So there's a lot of veterans out there hurting, and they come to safe places like the county too, and tell their stories.
Mm-hmm.
And we get them to where they need to go.
Is there resistance? Going back to stigma, is there resistance with some of them with a therapist or a counselor versus, like I said, they come to your door and say,
Yeah, I think generally yes, but I think because of the grassroots nature of the VOC and because we have so many veterans working there, they don't see us as, we call our Department of Behavioral Health, but they just see us as helpful people. Because we don't, we might have a degree on the wall, but the way we open up the doors and make it a welcoming environment and not make it a clinic, I think that helps with that.
And that's just it. Everything we've been talking about, everything that I just talked about with my experiences until I met the one doctor. I'm not a therapist. I took minored in psychology, but I have a lot of veterans. They'll call me to talk, and I take their calls 8:00 at night, and they don't call their therapist. And like Roderick was just saying, they'll come and they feel comfortable coming because, at least to me, they know you care. When they know you care, or when they know that you understand, you've been there, and you're not just checking in and checking out. You're here for a paycheck, but they can come to you. That makes all the difference. And then the hope part, like I was talking about. Yeah. I've never had a veteran that was really offended by saying anything, as far as, because most of them are in a place where they got a lot of more serious issues.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I was just talking to a veteran about this today, that I tell veterans that help me, it's just a way of looking at things that one of the most frustrating things with me and that I had to learn to accept was I used to get very angry and very frustrated that nobody understood. My wife didn't understand, and my wife's a veteran. I felt like nobody understood. And no matter how hard I tried to explain it, I felt like nobody understood, like what I'm going through and how it is for me. And the doctor I met with, he explained it to me. He said, listen, think of it like this. He says, if I break my leg and I try to explain to you how that feels, he goes, that hurts, right? He goes, you can imagine how much it hurts. And it hurts, and you can imagine the pain, but do you know what it feels like? And I'm like, no, only he knows what it feels like because he experienced it. And then he said to me, is that your fault because you didn't break your leg? And I said, oh, and I tell that to veterans now because that made me realize, look, you could get frustrated the rest of your life and explain it to your blue in the face. And they're not, people who haven't experienced it are never going to get it. And it's not their fault.
Yeah.
I
like that metaphor.
It's not their fault.
Yeah.
And once you can understand that was one of the biggest obstacles for me. And you could start looking at, it takes down a lot of anger, because I used to have a lot of anger. Like, why can't you understand, And
do you see that a lot with other veterans too?
Oh yeah. And that's the trust issue too. Like,
yeah.
When you're open with them, they'll be open with you. And when I first got out, I didn't want to admit that I had anything wrong. Yeah. Once I was diagnosed with PT, I didn't want anybody to know. I was ashamed.
Yeah.
I was embarrassed. And actually, my boss now, my director that I was talking about earlier, he was so open with his story and where he came from, that I started being open. There's nothing to be ashamed about.
Yeah.
You know, you struggled you know what I mean? It's if you're in the military, especially, the longer you are, the more traumatic events you see. Who would be normal coming back from that?
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, and the amount of people that can understand that it gets narrower and narrower. So I want to go further with that metaphor. I would say, as long as you have people that care that your leg is broken, you're doing pretty good. You know, be grateful for that. They might not understand exactly how it feels, but they give a damn you broke your leg, and they're going to help you.
And suicide is unfortunately, and it's well known, it's been prevalent in the military. I've had a number of guys I served with in my unit that committed suicide. One of them would have been the last guy I would have ever imagined would have done it. I was just in shock. But doing this job, I also file for survivors benefits too. I just recently got a widow approved. Thank God, her husband hung himself, and he was a gentleman that he should have received help. He didn't talk about it, and the older generation is much more held back with that. I mean, the World War II vets are far, you know, there's few of them left, Korean War vets, and I've only had a few that really opened up to me, but they just, it's a pride thing, I guess, you know, and there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with it, you know.
Yeah. So if you could change one thing about vets receiving what they need, like the help that they need for mental health, whatever it is, what would that be?
Yeah, I'd like it to be not luck of the draw, like wherever you're going back to, or you've chosen a new place to live. I don't want it just to be you get lucky if you end up in a place like Rochester that has a lot, and our vets still struggle with all the support we're able to give them. You know, so I want things available. At least, you know, they can't be everywhere, but at least in lots more places where vets can get to no matter where they live, you know. And if it's far away, if they live in a very rural area, transportation provided, you know, like, you know, because even in Rochester we have problems with transportation, just getting the vets, you know, out to the main VA clinic. So you can imagine in a rural area, but that would be my dream, that all vets have transportation to behavioral health services when they need it. And there's a big push for peer support facilities and ways of doing things, which means it's kind of like, well, we're peers and we're supporting, but at a lower level, just having places where veterans who are doing pretty well enough that they're stable, that they can provide a little bit of help to other vets. They don't have to be counselors. They just have to be at a certain level of stability, and then have a place where they can come talk to the vets and then get help from there. So that would be my dream.
Okay. And I do think that what you just said, that is one of the, how would I put it? That is one of the biggest benefits or one of the most important things for someone who's struggling with mental health that people don't realize. But if they're given the opportunity, no matter how bad off they are, to help somebody else, no matter how small it is, and they feel like they're helping somebody else, that they have a purpose, that's huge.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of times, like you said, we are very lucky in Monroe County, the Rochester area. We have a lot of organizations and we work very close together, but a lot of areas don't have what we have. And even still, you know, veterans struggle, and you know, it'd be nice if there was that one right answer, you know, but there's not. But I mean, I guess if you're looking for the one thing that is probably going to help more than anything else, it's kind of everything we just talked about now, having the right people there, because you could have people there, you can have an organization there, but if the veteran doesn't feel like you're helping him or doesn't trust you, he's going to be turned off. He even more turned off than before, because he's going to feel like, man, I came to get help and no one can help me.
One of my heroes, Gary Bykirk, he's a Medal of Honor winner, passed away recently. But he was also a mental health counselor, and he helped start the Veterans Outreach Center, back in the 70s. But he had a book signing that I went to, and he was open for questions. And the questions I asked him, Gary, how can we get more veterans in the counseling field, the helping professions like you have done? Because I'm here speaking with you. I'm a veteran and a counselor, but how can we get more? Because that's the key, I think, getting more veterans become working in the human services area, working for counties, states, helping the veterans, advocating for them, vet to vet.
Yeah. Man, everything you bring up, real quick about Gary Bykirk. I knew Gary very well. Me and my boss were up with his family up until the day he died. For anybody who doesn't know, Congressional Medal of Honor winner, Special Forces, Green Beret, Vietnam. And he was my guidance counselor in 8th grade.
Oh, wow.
He was a guidance counselor in Greece for a long time before he became a pastor and went around. And just real quick, I remember when I first took this job, and there was an event, and I was probably 33, 34 at the time, and I hadn't seen him in 25 years. And we were walking out of the event, and I heard, "Hey, Matt," and it was Gary. I couldn't even believe he recognized me. And he came up to me and he said, "How you doing?" And I said, "I'm good, Gary. I just got out a couple years ago." He goes, "Yeah, I know you got out." He goes, and then he said to me like this, and I get chills. He goes, "How you doing?"
Yeah.
Like that. You know what I mean?
How you really doing?
Yeah. And that meant a lot. I mean, if you ever met Gary Bykirk, probably the most humblest man, nicest man you'll ever meet in your life. He was it. Yeah. And even Gary lived in a cave in the woods for 5 years when he first came home.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. He had to go through that.
Yeah. And yeah.
All right, so we'll wrap it up with the last question. How can civilians best support vets who they love, who need mental health support?
Well, try not to create shame, additional shame, because there's probably already a lot there. Hold space as long as you can until it gets too dangerous. If it becomes dangerous to self or others, you got to get some outside help. You can't keep that in the house when somebody might get hurt. And watch legitimate videos about veteran experience. Just try to educate yourself, just so you can have some empathy for some of the struggles, and because they are unique. Other cultures throughout history have had ways to transition their warriors, back to society. We don't do such a good job with that. Going back to the Vikings, they had a village outside the village where war would happen. The soldiers would go live in the village for like a month, tell stories, paint their shields, drink. And then when they were ready, they'd go back to their families in the village. Like starting with Vietnam era, somebody could walk out the jungle, get on a plane, 24 hours, be back in the United States, back in their hometown. Now it's even quicker.
That's how it was for me.
That's crazy.
I carried my weapon for 15 months everywhere I went, and on a plane, turned it in, bus pulls away, there's your family. I'm standing in Walmart. And I remember for the first couple of weeks, I would reach down and without thinking for a couple seconds, I would panic. Like, where's my weapon? Like I lost it. And
that's the worst thing you can do is lose your weapon.
Yeah. But going back to what you were saying, everything we've talked about, civilians won't understand, breaking the leg, what we were talking about, but they can have empathy.
Yeah.
And, give you some space. Don't pile up. Don't put more pressure there. And let the veteran know you are there for them. And I think by telling the veteran, look, I don't know what you went through. My wife has said that, but trying to help a veteran, not only trust is a big issue, but trying to help the veteran see in the mirror that the issues they do have, because denial is a big thing, and trying to get them to help themselves too.
Yeah, agreed.
It's a downward spiral. You're in bad shape, you lose your wife, you get arrested, and it's just spirals downhill, and you go from, wow, I'm an Army veteran, I served my country, and now I'm homeless or I'm in jail. And
that's a big hole to dig out from.
Yeah.
But we do what we can.
Yeah, vet court.
Yeah.
I work with vet court. I go in the Monroe County Jail and work with veterans there, and a lot of those are discharge upgrades.
Yeah, just finding them sometimes because
Yeah,
they don't wave flags saying I'm a veteran necessarily.
Yeah.
and a lot of them have a bad taste in their mouth and have had negative experiences too. So,
All right. Well, I want to thank you guys. I really appreciate you being here and participating in this. It's been very educational and eye-opening for me, and hopefully, people that watch the video will get that same impression, that same information out of this. So, thank you for coming here. I really appreciate it, and have a good evening.
thanks for having us. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.